Now, if you have any questions during this session, you can send them to this number here at the front, or some number in front as well. But don't worry about that for now. All right. Now, I'd like to invite our speakers to the stage, and just for introductions, we'll ask her a few questions about herself. Everyone, please welcome Stacey England. Stacey,
Yes.
please tell us about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
All right. My name's Stacey England. I am from the US. So I grew up in Indiana in a small town, one of 6 siblings. So we had a big family, lots going on. I've been married for about 4 years now to an Aussie, which is why I'm here. Before moving here, we lived and worked in Hong Kong for 6 years. So I studied social work in the US, started working in family violence and sexual assault work there. Did that for a few years. When I was working in Hong Kong, I worked in anti-poverty, mostly in the Philippines, helping people get out of poverty there, and then switched back into counseling as well. And since we've been in Australia, I have worked in family violence counseling.
Oh, that's cool. Stacey, so what inspires you to continue working as a therapist?
So I think the inspiration to continue really comes from the calling that I felt when I started. So I went to school for counseling after doing a 3-month mission internship in Texas in the US, and was really working on the streets. So it was people using substance abuse, a lot of relationship breakdown, people in homelessness, and working in that area. I started talking with my mentors as that missions placement was wrapping up. And a lot of them said, knowing me, knowing my passions, also mentioned counseling was sort of a long-term need for all these people we were serving. And that's what led me to study social work and come into this work. And I've shifted also to working with kids a lot more, because as I started counseling work, so many of the people I encountered had grown up in broken homes. And so getting to intervene early, work with kids and help them start healing is really what keeps that passion alive, to sort of prevent problems from continuing.
Yep, that's great. And what do you hope to accomplish after speaking at this seminar?
I think I'm actually just really excited. Like I said, I just moved to Australia about a year ago, so pretty new to the church. And I'm just excited to see how this ministry can grow. I know family violence affects every part of the world, every part of society. So I'm just excited to kind of see what you guys come up with as you're listening, learning, and how you think we can serve together as a church.
All right, awesome. Those are all the questions I have for you. So Stacey.
Thanks, JP.
Everyone.
Oh, there's your number if you want to text questions in. We'll just keep that up for you for a bit, but it's also right here. And we'll have a panel at the end of the presentation, but we will be a bit interactive. So there's a couple points where I'm going to ask you to do things with your table group, get to know each other a bit. But this is our topic for today. So thank you all for coming. I know sometimes people see family violence and controlling relationships and want to go the other way because it can feel like a heavy topic. So I'm really just grateful that you guys are here. Also, if I start to pull the microphone away from my face, just tell me to bring it back so you can still hear me. All right, so I want to start off, because this is a heavy topic, just giving some numbers for helplines. If you want to jot any of these down, because talking about family violence can trigger memories or a lot of emotions for some of us. And so I want you to have numbers you can call. I will have these up again at the end as well, and some other ones. But just to understand, if something is coming up, if you need to write things down, if you need to walk out of the room, take a break, feel free. And you can grab someone for support as well. All right, so we have a lot to cover, and I'm going to do my best to get through it all. So these are just the few things. We want to first talk about what is domestic and family violence. You'll see DFV or FV in there a lot, just to make it shorter for the slides. How to talk to people when you're worried about them, how to support victim survivors of abuse, as well as how to support people that are using violence. And then a little bit at the end, and more with the panel, I hope, about talking about it within the church and in our small group settings. So step one, if we're going to be supporting people working with domestic family violence, we need to know what it is. So we're just going to do a quick overview. A little note about language. Because I work in this field, there is a very gendered nature. So when I'm talking about victim survivors, I will most of the time say she or her, just because that's the statistics. Mostly it's women that are victim survivors. So if I do that, it's not because men can't be victims. It's not because it's only in heterosexual relationships. That's just what we see most often. Another note I wanted to put is this quote. So we use the term victim survivor because we use survivor because people are really surviving in a really hard situation, and we want to acknowledge that strength. But we also use the term victim because they're suffering something that no one should have to live through. And so we kind of put those two words together to honor both sides of that experience. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Oh, that turned funny. Recognizing abuse. These are just 3 sort of highlight points that we're going to look at. So the human rights, the reason we use the human rights framework is because it's the Human Rights Charter from the UN is recognized by most countries in the world. So this kind of crosses cultures, and to be able to recognize just based on human rights, it's not where cultural differences come in, but what rights do humans have? So this is split into 2 slides if you do want to take a picture. Just looking at humans have the right to certain physical freedoms. And you can see though, deciding who can touch me, access to healthcare, and paying attention to our own bodies. There's also a lot of the emotional, psychological. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just kind of some samples of what human rights and in different areas. So emotional rights to have our opinions, to express our opinions and not have those demeaned, to pursue dreams and have dreams, and to be able to say no and still be treated with respect. There's also financial rights. So as you're earning money, having right to access joint funds, having a decision and a voice in how money is spent in your family. Social and technological is a really evolving area to see people find new ways to sort of get into people's lives through that. So just understanding people's rights to make new friends, make connections, speaking to people of any gender. Freedom of movement without restriction is a really big one. I have quite a few clients who are really afraid of using their phones because of all the anxiety, the way it's been used to control them. Spiritual rights, so the right to choose and practice your religion. We see that getting taken away a lot from people, and that's both the spiritual and the social side of it. They get disconnected from their community. And then sexual rights, so having that chance to say no to sex or change your mind, that a lot of times gets lost even within marriages. So that's just a brief overview of some areas. And again, using that human rights framework to pull back to, so you have more of an objective and well accepted around the world perspective on what rights do I have as a human. And so we go from there to what are the types of abuse that people use. And you'll see there's kind of, they overlap with the types of human rights that we have. So we have rights to have our own opinions and to express them. And emotional abuse will often shut it down, not let people pursue their dreams. The power and control wheel. So this really pulls the idea back to abuse is about power and control, which is why we also put that title, Controlling Relationships, in there, because a lot of times when we think violence, we think physical. But really it's the controlling behavior that can have the biggest impact. So we look at this just as examples of things you see. So you'll see using male privilege. You might see like the woman gets all of the chores in the house and the man is expected to contribute nothing. And a lot of times, like you're a bad mom, you're a bad woman because the house is dirty, because the kids didn't get to school on time. So you see a lot of that. Using economic abuse, so not letting the one partner have any choice in how money is spent. Coercion and threats is a really big one. Threats to threats to harm family comes in a lot. And just intimidation. So even if it's not physical violence towards a person, breaking things around them and just showing strength can be a big part of controlling behavior. We also see a lot of using children. So that can be a bit of a tricky one where the one partner will use the kids to sort of manipulate or spy on the other partner. And then a big part, that minimizing, denying, and blaming, when the victim survivor starts to have questions like, is this okay? What's going on? Am I crazy? Really just saying like, you shouldn't feel that way. I love you so much. Why are you feeling upset? So you see a lot of just whatever those emotions that are coming up. If the partner feels afraid, the victim survivor's feeling afraid, that really just gets minimized and brushed under. So this is, again, just an example of all the different areas that can show up. Sometimes you'll see all of them in a relationship, sometimes just a few, and that's enough to get the control that the person using force is needing. All right, so that was a bit heavy. I want to take a little break right now for a happy thing. There's all the paper. Can I get some help handing these out? We'll just give everybody a paper and take a minute. Now that we've gone over some data, get some time with yourself. So if you just take your paper, you've got pencils or pens around, raise your hand if you need them. And just draw a picture of a happy memory from your childhood. It doesn't have to be your favorite day or anything like that, just any happy memory. It looks like most people have finished up drawing a picture. Let's see. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've drawn?
So I drew a image of playing soccer as a kid. Yeah, with friends. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a good one. There's no smiles though. Are you guys happy? Yeah. Okay, just checking. How about you?
So I remember having a lot of sleepovers when I was a child, and my friends would come over during the school holidays, and that was quite fun.
Some happy memories?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Oh. All right. Glad you were happy about that. Let's see, who else would like to show me their picture? Can you show me what you've drawn?
It's a photo of me and my dad kicking footy.
Okay. Were you guys happy doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Not anymore. You didn't invite me. What was that about? All right. Anyone here want to show me their picture? What did you draw there?
I drew a Saturday morning going to Macca's with my family.
Who's there in your family?
My dad, my mom, and my older sister.
Okay. How are you feeling right now?
Confused.
All right. So you've probably seen me rip up some other pictures, right? I'll make you a deal. If you will sing a little song, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I won't rip up your picture.
Sure. The twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Well done. That was great. Does anyone else want to show me their picture? All right. Okay, so that was hopefully a little bit fun to draw a picture. Sorry for those of you whose photos I ripped up. And thank you for singing. And I'm sorry, because that really was also an example of coercive control. By intimidating people around you, you probably weren't planning to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Star, were you? Yeah, so I am sorry. But thank you guys for joining. And just that little bit of discomfort gives us a little taste of what victim survivors are going through. Kind of that you feel that tension rising as you see the other pictures torn. And when I come up to you, what do you notice in yourself? What did you guys notice? Maybe you too. Yeah. Yeah, I noticed I had no volunteers after I ripped up poor Serena's picture. So that's just a quick taste, because coercive control can be a really hard thing to recognize. So I wanted us to get a little sense of that in our gut as well, instead of just words. Like, I can give you some descriptions, but really that gut feeling of, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to do something I don't want to do, or that fear of, oh, this person's coming now. I can see that look in their face, and I know this isn't going to be good. So when we talk about coercive control, this is in some ways the most difficult to spot part of family violence, but also the most damaging, because it is so hard to spot, and because you're kind of like, did I want to do that? Because I didn't want my picture torn up, but I also didn't really want to sing in front of everyone. So it was sort of a lose-lose situation. So what we're looking at here, a lot of that control comes first from isolating from support, that monitoring activity. So when you need someone to report in about everything they're doing, not giving freedom. Gaslighting is a tricky one as well. So that's basically making someone feel crazy. So ask them to repeat exactly, what did I just say to you? And if you get anything wrong, like, your memory is so bad, how did you forget? And it just makes you really start to question your own thoughts. Name calling and controlling money are pretty self-explanatory. And then it can be around reinforcing gender roles, turning the children against you, controlling aspects of health and body. So you might have seen some of that in the news, just controlling what people could wear, not letting people wear certain colors or styles of clothing. It's, again, just getting that control, making sure they're doing what you want, not what they want. Using jealousy, like, I love you so much, it just makes me uncomfortable when you do this. So using that jealousy, it's all about my feelings, what you do. Having all the decisions about the sexual relationship, or threatening children or pets. All of those are used to control people. But really, that top line, it's the pattern of behavior. So for any of us, we can have those moments where we really want to convince someone to do things our way because we feel so strongly about it. But it really comes down to, what is that pattern? Is it consistently one partner controlling the other? Okay, so I also wanted to touch on this. As I mentioned in my introduction, I've started working a lot more with kids now. And this is why I think a lot of times we think about kids as being exposed to family violence, not being victims themselves. And so just looking at what children are losing. And so looking at children really deserve a relationship with both parents. So even if they can't have a healthy relationship, to find a way to respect each other enough to let the children have access to both. And children are really dependent, so they don't have much of a choice to get out of the situation. They depend on caregivers. They get used a lot after separation, and it disrupts their attachments early on, which can make relationships harder throughout their lives. So really supporting the kids is really close to my heart, and a big part of how we can help. We will see, is the audio going to work? Okay.
Someone once told me that you will remember the way people make you feel, and not what they give you. This prompted me to think about how the people around me made me feel. When I was younger, I used to spend time with my dad and sister. Everything seemed so simple then. My concept of right and wrong was governed purely by what he'd agreed. I remember the way he used to turn everything I loved against me. My innermost passions seemed to be made a joke. Because of that, I tend to blame him for my lack of motivation. The things that I enjoyed the most soon became a source of guilt, and no matter where I turned, his words followed me like a dark cloud. He took everything from me simply because he didn't understand how they worked, what they did for me, and what my future held. As I found my muse in the outside world, he found himself losing his control and power over me. My priorities grew to change from happiness to mere survival as I changed to fit my environment. The monotonous routine that ensued almost every week dealt heavy blows to my outlook, my social life, and my attitude. Even now, it seems as if there is no escape. If I look hard enough, I can still see him in the shadows and around corners. My mind adds silhouettes of him underneath streetlights and behind windows, the figures unshakable no matter how many times I blink. Sometimes, if a voice is raised or the wrong words used, I can hear their voices morph into his. Someone once told me that you'll remember the way people make you feel, and not what they give you. For years, I was made to feel hopeless, a disappointment, useless, demonized. Are these the kind of feelings you want to leave me with? Is this the kind of father you dreamed of being?
It's stories directly from young people. So it doesn't have their pictures, they're de-identified, but you can hear from young people what their experience was like. In this particular story, the young person talks about how her dad just took away all of her hopes and dreams. So everything she sort of hoped to achieve, or everything she was passionate about, he took away and made fun of. So she didn't have a chance to pursue those dreams or find out really what her passions were, because they just kept getting crushed. So you can go to, it's a good website to hear directly from people. No, it's all fine. But I would encourage you, if this is sort of stirring interest, an area you want to work in, to spend time listening to the stories of victim survivors directly, because it's more powerful and more real than what I can share from other people's stories, people I've worked with. So this is from that study where they made these videos. They also put together what children need from their parents who choose to use violence. And so that's this list on the side. Children really are asking and needing their parents to make amends. They do some desire reparation, they desire reparation even if they don't want the relationship to go on. They still want the acknowledgement that what you did to me was wrong, that this has really harmed me and I've had to heal. So they want that acknowledgement. And if there is going to be a reparation in the relationship, the person that used violence needs to address the past, say that, yeah, I did this and it was wrong, make a commitment to change, and take the time to rebuild trust. All right. Any questions at this point? I guess we'll have questions at the end. So I should just, if you have questions about what it looks like, jot them down or text them to that number. But we're going to move on to, how do we talk to someone? So maybe we recognize some of those things happening. How do we talk to someone that we're worried about? I chose this picture because it's a bit goofy and happy. And we need to have a little bit of lightness, but also it can feel awkward. Like if you're trying to have a conversation with a dog, it can feel awkward. Like, how do I start this conversation that feels weird? So these are first, just really quickly, we could do trauma-informed care all day as well. But that sense of felt safety. So finding out what the person you're talking to, what feels safe to them. So for example, I have a lot of clients who don't feel safe talking on the phone because they had so many phone calls where they just got harassed. So they really are much more comfortable if I come talk to them. But I have also the reverse, where people are really uncomfortable having others in their house, so they'd much rather just talk on the phone. So it's really what feels safe to that person, not what is safe in my mind. Connection is about that, really identifying the empathy with people, connecting, finding similarities, so you have a relationship to start from. And self-regulation is about you and how you can calm your own system when you're talking to someone else. So if you're asking them to talk about something that's tough, or if you notice in yourself that, like, oh gosh, now I'm starting to panic because you're telling me this thing and I don't know what to do, to take a breath, calm yourself down, so that you can really listen and not increase their anxiety because our nervous systems do communicate constantly. You guys might have noticed that I'm nervous talking. So just having that moment to say, I'm here to listen to you, and whatever you say, I'm just taking in as information, and taking that pause and breath if you need it. All right. So these are some hints. Most of the time, it's hard to recognize our own situations when we're in them, whatever that looks like, whether it's family violence, whether we're struggling with an addiction. We probably wouldn't call it an addiction at first. So these are some common phrases that will give you a hint. Maybe things in this relationship aren't quite equal. Maybe one person has more control. Again, this is all gendered because that's just most of what we see. But things as simple as "he won't let me," if you start to hear that a lot, it's like, okay, so he's making all the decisions for you. It's probably not good. "I have to walk on eggshells" is one that's pretty common. That feeling when I come walking up to you to see your picture. What am I going to have to do to make this okay? Things like "he is controlling" are a bit more obvious to see. He has a bad temper, or sometimes he hits me, but he doesn't mean to. So there's a lot of little hints. I'll give you a second just to kind of think through in your mind, have you heard any of these things? Have you thought any of these things about a relationship? And are there any others that kind of have been hints for you? Because I'm always happy to add more to the list. I do want to point out also, he's a rough disciplinarian, so sometimes it's about the relationship with the kids. So I'm going to highlight, this is from the Safe and Together Institute. So there's quite a bit of stuff from them as well that you can look into if you're looking for more resources. So ways to ask if you are worried. This is one of, I think, the hardest steps. So maybe you start to recognize it and then you're sort of like, well, what next? What do I do? So I think the principles are focus on behaviors that you've observed, and because that's really tangible things that you've seen, and then leave it open and accept whatever they say, whether that's because you've interpreted it wrong or because they're not ready to talk about it. Just accept whatever they're going to share. So here are some samples. I could be wrong, but I've noticed he looks angry when you're talking to another man. How does this feel for you? So that's an open-ended question to give them a chance to tell their story. Actually, writing these slides, I realized it's very hard not to ask yes or no questions. So just kind of keep that in mind, to try to leave it as open as possible. If you do ask a yes or no question, you can always follow it up with, okay, tell me more. Or do you want to tell me any more? So these are just, again, some examples. It seems like this is what I'm seeing, and it can be things you see about the relationship between them, or the relationship with the kids can also give you hints. And then another just good tip at the bottom there, if you have that sort of mentor relationship, anyone that you are talking to, is there anything else you want to talk about that I haven't asked you? Just give them that openness, because you may not have noticed it, but they really want to tell you. Here are some examples of unhelpful responses. So this, like saying, "at least he isn't hitting you every day," it's that minimizing. So it's really easy to get alongside what perpetrators are doing. Sometimes also there's the, "well, you chose this," like you chose this guy, so you got to stick with it, or kind of putting the blame on the person that's being hurt. Also, that telling her she's smarter than that and just needs to leave minimizes how complicated and difficult it is to leave. So these are just some things probably you want to avoid. But if you do, like if you have these thoughts come up, or if you say them, you can always kind of be like, "ooh, that maybe was making light of a situation that's actually really difficult." So we can always own those. Like, we all say things that aren't helpful all the time. I wanted to also touch on this top one. So telling her that disclosure will hurt the community can also be a really difficult one in the church. Like, oh, if people find out this happened in our church, what's going to happen? So I think that's one we need to be really aware of. It also happens within migrant communities a lot. So just kind of taking that, you can, if even if that is in your mind, to think about how do I communicate with this person to support them. And when you are listening, so if you ask those questions, I've noticed that he gets angry when, how does that make you feel if they start telling you, you know, these are things that are happening that make me feel uncomfortable. This is what we do and don't want to do. So I've given you the slide of unhelpful things, but don't worry too much about saying the wrong thing, because it's really more about listening. And if you get stuck in what am I going to say back, you're not going to be listening. So don't rush people. Don't start digging for more than they want to share. Just again, leave it open. You can invite more, but you're not going to dig. Also, don't make promises you can't keep. I think that's a tough one, because we do want to say, you know, call anytime, day or night. I don't have my phone on at night. So if someone calls me at 3 a.m., I'm not going to answer, because my phone's not going to ring because it's off. So just be careful about what you're not promising more than you can actually deliver. And things that we do want to do, giving full attention, keeping calm. So again, you might have that, oh, this is big and I don't know what to do. Even if that's what you say, like, I don't know what to do, but I have some numbers we can call and maybe they can help. That's enough. Remind the person that they're brave to be living in that situation, but also to be talking about it. So that can be really difficult. I think it is also important with children. Any of you working with children probably know this, but that you might need to tell others. So we can't give that sort of blanket, you know, whatever you say, we'll keep it secret just between us, especially with kids. If they're getting hurt, if there's a risk of harm to them or others, we actually do have to tell. So just keep that in mind. Now another little activity for you guys to do with your tables. This is just a quick case study. So kind of story I see a lot. But say a young woman starts coming to church here with her 4-year-old and her 1-year-old daughters. You invite her out to coffee because you want to make her feel welcomed at church. But she says she isn't allowed to spend money going to cafes. So you offer to pay for the coffee. She agrees to meet you. And when you get there, she takes a picture with the logo of the cafe in the background to send to her partner, because he likes to know what she does throughout the day. So she makes sure you're in the photo, because she also wants it clear she's meeting another woman. I guess for you men in the room, you're just going to have to pretend a little bit with me. And she mentions she would like to study, but it's the woman's job to care for the kids. So she's not free to go back to school and study. But maybe someday when she's older, when the kids are older, she'll be able to. So have a little chat within your groups just about these. And then we're also going to go back and do a role play. So those the kind of questions, how would you ask if someone told you these things? First, notice what's your natural response when you're hearing this, to kind of see how would I keep myself calm? What are the warning signs, and how might you ask what's going on? Okay, I'm going to see if anyone feels brave enough to share some of what you're discussing. All right, sounds like really good conversations happening. Does anyone feel ready to share just what was your natural response, whether it was yours or someone else at your table that shared what kind of natural responses were coming up reading that story?
Wait, like what response? Okay, well, we kind of started off by saying like, okay, the most recent thing we talked about is some of this can be cultural, like how big of a red flag it is. And, you know, when we look at things like kind of in isolation, like with the whole like, oh, like that taking the photo, you know, that might not kind of bring forward any suspicion. And even things like, oh, I'm not allowed to spend money on this, like not to make assumptions. And I guess in this case, we're presented a scenario. So we're kind of more aware that, oh, maybe there's a risk. But I think the point was to keep an open mind, to be aware of this possibility, but at the same time, not to make any assumptions. So like action wise, we were like, well, you know, it's our first time meeting this lady. We want this to be a safe space for her. So kind of just, I guess, focus on establishing that relationship. So maybe she can come to you if anything comes up.
Yeah. That is awesome. And really, really good, right? So those, going back to the pillars of trauma-informed care, that connection, let's get that done first before someone might feel safe enough so we don't have to dive right into questioning people about their relationships. That's really good. Anyone else? You can answer any of the questions. Also, it's okay if you were going to just dive into asking questions, because that's why the scenario was up there and it was kind of fed to highlight some of those things.
I think one of the things we talked about was it's okay for a partner to want to know where the person, what they did today, but requiring a photo of it betrays a lack of trust in the other person and what they're going to report, or whether or not what they're saying is true. Yeah, so it's a warning signal.
Yeah, so just kind of noting, okay, here are some warning signs. Seeing a lack of trust that one person has to prove themselves. Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, I thought they were in the right place. They are coming to church. So I think the natural response is to look for somebody like yourself in the church to help them. And I think, you know, there are other places that this person can go. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on in her life. And some of them are quite, you know, if you look at it, you need to actually know in depth the context of where all these are happening. And I guess, you know, the place where she can start is actually coming to the church, and where she can actually experience the deeper love and also compassion.
I love that strengths focus. So she does have some connections. She's connecting to a community. And we really do need a lot more context than one slide. You guys are right. So that's really good, just to kind of think, these are things we're seeing. There could be warning signs, and we're just going to keep an eye on them and make that connection, make sure we're a safe place and really supporting her. So that does go into the next little part of this. So supporting people that are living in controlling relationships or living with violence. Step one is sort of getting into their shoes, trying that empathy. How does it feel to live in that situation? There's limited choices. People feel less safe, a lot less joy, because there's so much focus on just, how do I survive this? How do I not get hurt? How do I keep this other person happy? Because when they're not happy, my whole life gets torn apart. And so you guys have already all touched on this. So being the opposite of that voice, if you have that voice that's in your head living as a victim survivor, you know, everything like, I'm bad all the time, I'm doing everything wrong, I'm crazy, I'm stupid. You get all those voices in your head. And so really just kind of standing in the opposite side of that, that we as Christians know that you're a valuable person made in the image of God. And we're just going to start at that root point and love you from that spot, love you the way Jesus would love you. Then we can stand opposite to all those things of, I'm crazy, I'm stupid, I'm bad. So remind them what they're doing right. You're coming to church, you're building community. You know, you've come here to hang out with me. That's great. I'm super glad. I'm really grateful that you've made time for me. I'm reminding people that violence isn't their fault. If they're victims, it's not because they're doing something wrong. It's because someone else is choosing to use force or choosing to be controlling. Offering practical support, which we'll get into a bit later, just by preventing social isolation. So keep asking her out to coffee, even if it means you're paying for two, so you cut out one of your other coffees in the week, but just keeping that open. it prevents that isolation that allows control. Encouraging their dreams, sharing their joy. So kind of the opposite of the story I was sharing from the young person who couldn't pursue their dreams. Just encouraging that and letting them know that what they love matters. And speaking, again, the truth about value and worth. And patience and understanding is a big part of that. Whatever you choose is okay. We'll get into that a bit more later as well, but not by being opposite, we're not pushing them to leave a relationship, just being patient as they make their choices. So listening and learning, you can learn about the types of violence that are being used, because that's how we can stand opposed to those lies, the messages coming in that are hurtful. Learn about the impact on the family so you can kind of support in those other areas. Is it really making it hard to parent? How can we help you with your kids? Look for patterns that indicate serious danger. So that's where you might have to take steps even without them. We want to give victim survivors as much choice as possible. But if you're really concerned that someone is at risk for their life or serious injury, you might have to take some steps, call the police to get them some help. And then also considering how the person choosing violence has responded to previous efforts of that person to leave the relationship or to get help, like go to counseling. Have they been open to couples counseling, or have they shut it down anytime it was suggested? So here are some red flags. You might want to take a picture of that one too, because it's a long list. But this is the list from the Victorian government that actually indicates serious risk for death or serious injury. So like injuries that could lead to long-term disability as well. So these are your big red flags where you might say, if I hear about any of these, I'm going to really start stepping in to try to help someone get out of that relationship, get somewhere safe, because it really could mean the end of their life if they stay at this point. But it's still their choice, right? We can do everything we can to support along the side. And especially with kids, we do have a duty to report, to call the police, to call child protection. But those are the things you really want to look for. Other practical supports you can give. So I will say, when we talk about that it's the person's choice, it takes people on average 7 attempts to leave a controlling relationship before they actually can get out. So when I said patience and understanding before, that's part of that whole process. You know, they might try to leave, they go back for whatever reason, and just being alongside. But here's practical ways you can help. So let them guide, because they've been surviving in that situation. So they know what they can and can't do, what is safe and what's not safe better than we do. But you can do things like drive them to appointments, whether that's counseling appointments, doctor's appointments, just places where more people can see what's happening. So preventing that isolation. You can provide or help them find financial assistance. You can let them use your phone. So we kind of talked about how people will monitor what's in people's phones. Have you called anyone? Who are you texting? If you let them use your phone to talk to counselors or doctors or whoever can support them, that just gives them extra protection. Keeping a safe bag. So a set of car keys, copies of all of their IDs. You can look at what needs to go in a safe bag. I won't go into that whole list. But keeping one of those at your house, extra clothes, extra nappies, extra medicine. So if they do have to leave in a hurry, they have all of that in a place. And then you can also help keep records of what's happening in the relationship, because if they keep that record, it might get found. And so there's also a lot of these other websites I've shared have other resources as well. And there's some emergency assistance through VCAT, which is why that's listed. Also, very important, considering our own safety when we want to support people. So if you're working with, you're right next to a person that is choosing violence, and that isn't always safe. So consider what boundaries you need to draw for your family, for yourself, to keep yourself safe as well. Like I mentioned earlier, you might get to a point where you feel you need to call the police because you're just really worried that that person's not safe. And then you can call Safe Steps or the police. Safe Steps has a crisis line, and 1-800-RESPECT. They'll both give you resources if you're really concerned and don't know what to do. Also, most parts of Melbourne now have the Orange Door, which is another great one to call. should have put those numbers in, sorry. All right, this is something you kind of touched on. So considering that we call it intersectional identities, but like you mentioned, culturally, it might just be, we would like to take a picture of where we go to the cafe, so it's not going to raise alarm bells. And so just really, yeah, whatever culture they're from, really getting into context, which you guys mentioned. These are specific groups of people that when we do risk assessments, we have extra questions to ask because there are different things that will identify risk with these different groups. So moving on, this is, I think, a really important spot, and it's really easy to focus on victim survivors. But really, if we want to stop controlling relationships, we have to be addressing people that are choosing to use force and violence to control. And I guess I'll just put a caveat on this. As far as the work I've done, I did about 6 months working with people who use force and use violence. And most of the rest of my time has been working with victims of violence. So this is more principles that I've seen from alongside, not deep in that work. But sort of the first thing is looking at, when you see that relationship, the case study we talked about, when we want to get the context, these will be things to look for in the context for the partner in that relationship. Are there a lot of risk factors where he might be using controlling behavior or using violence because of where he's at? So that could be having lost a job recently or losing access to education. Economic stress is a big one. Suicide threats, suicide attempts, or depression, social isolation. Alcohol and substance use is another big one. So people will lose control and start using substances, and that makes them further lose control and start hurting others when they normally wouldn't. But there are a lot of people who also have mental health struggles or use substances that don't hurt others. So there's a lot of underlying factors as well. When you see conflicts in other relationships or possessiveness, if you see that sort of a person that needs to control other areas of life as well, then that gives you kind of a red flag. They might be really doing this in their relationship, or if they don't have very many healthy relationships with others. So just things to be looking out for as you are getting the bigger picture. And then what we need to help people using force do is actually make that choice to change. And for a lot of people that choose or are using force, they don't really see the harm that they're doing. They may not understand it, whether that's because of low empathy, because of the circumstances they grew up in. They may not know what a healthy relationship looks like. So they actually need to see the harm first before they can make the choice to change. But just like anyone, we can't force people to change. They have to make the choice. So when they are, again, they have to acknowledge the harm before they change. We might have to walk that journey of help them see the impacts of the behaviors they're choosing, how it's hurting other people, and then also helping them take responsibility for their choices. Because it is really easy to say, like, blame it on the drugs. I only do that when I'm drinking. So really taking responsibility. Okay, you know you do that when you're drinking, but you still chose to drink. So let's step it back even further. What is the choice that's really getting you there? And then apologizing and changing behavior are the big steps to make repairs. Getting support is a big part of that. For any of us trying to change behaviors, it's really hard to do it alone. This is another from the same Safer Families website. They have a section where men share their stories about how they were able to make changes. So I would recommend that website again. And so this is where we can step in. If we're saying, if you want to make a change, you need to get support, we can also be the support. And I think that's a really big area where we can step up to be willing to give people support. And so the first question is, are you really committed to seeing them succeed? And can you walk with that understanding and patience that we also need to walk alongside victim survivors when they make choices we don't agree with? Same thing will happen with people using force. They might do it again. And for you to have the patience and willingness to walk alongside. And then you can help provide these reminders. So a lot of that behavior comes from core beliefs about, I have no control over what I do. So I just do whatever I feel like. I do whatever I saw. So giving people that understanding they can choose behaviors, they can change what they're doing. Like I said before, just showing the hurt, it hurts your relationships, not just with your partner, it hurts your relationships with your friends. It makes it hard for you guys as a couple to connect to others. So just kind of showing that harm to themselves, showing the harm to their family. So how it hurts their kids. If you treat your partner one way, you're treating their other parent in a way that's harmful, that's going to hurt the kids and confuse them. And then also just, again, those core beliefs, you don't have the right to control other people. You can only control yourself. And then you can also help by mapping their behavior. So this gets really practical. What are you doing that's making that other person feel unsafe, that's controlling them? What things trigger these behaviors for you? What beliefs is it coming from? Is it, you had a rough day at work, that's when you start drinking, or you play video games and you get so mad when someone interrupts you that you throw stuff at them, right? And that it can kind of start in this, what are those early triggers so you can catch it then? On that website I was showing, one of the guys said he just needed like 5 to 10 minutes when he got home from work every day to settle and enter his family then, because if he was coming straight with the stress from work into the house is where he was using a lot of controlling behavior, because he was just so stressed out and wasn't considering the impacts. So figuring out what are the triggers, what can you do? What are things like when you're doing well? How do we do more of that? And what are ways we can support those healthier places for you? All right. Time, we're good. Okay, so I wanted to touch quickly on this, and I think I will leave more of it to Pastor Sam later and Sandra, because there's a lot of nuances in here, but these are just areas that I have encountered in this work where the way the church responds can be very difficult for people. So there is actually alongside there's the spiritual abuse of not letting someone enter any place of worship or practice their beliefs. But there are also, I've put these more things from the Bible, from the church. They can come from any religion where people will just pull out ideas and sort of use them to control others. So you'll see a lot of that children obey your parents. And so that can be used against kids to steal their dreams, not to punish really harshly, because children should obey their parents. If someone is in an unsafe relationship and they want to get out, people might immediately jump to God hates divorce, even if that person hadn't said, I want to get a divorce. They just wanted to get somewhere safe. And the wives submit to your husbands can be a big one. And so it can make it really hard for women to get out of unsafe relationships. And that it can be a lot of that gaslighting, like you're doing something wrong as a Christian woman if you're not submitting well enough, right? And the last one also comes up a lot in the healing, as well as trying to get out of unsafe relationships. You just have to keep forgiving, because Jesus said 70 times 7. So just forgive them again and again and again. And if you see, like when that violence starts to escalate, there's a really big tension between how do I survive and how do I be a good Christian? And you see a lot of that tension in people. So just from my experience, I guess I've seen the spectrum of people that did leave, got divorced, and started new families, and others who left, stayed with their kids, never got divorced, never remarried because they wanted to honor that relationship. But I've also had people come into my office and say, my pastor told me not to come get counseling because he told me you would just tell me to get divorced, so I can't come back. And that's really hard to hear as well, because you don't know what's going to happen to that person. And they weren't getting support from their church. So I think like that's just something I want us to be aware of, where these might be things we see them and we just believe, we agree with, it came out of the Bible, but how does that, again, context, how does that fit into this context? How does it fit into the big story of the Bible, the overall context? So these are things I just wanted to highlight for us. You might have others that come to your mind. Feel free to share those. But I do just want to have that in our minds. Another big word you'll hear, and there's a whole lot we could cover on collusion, but people that choose force, just kind of touching backwards. So when we look at men's behavior change, we see about 30% of people who go through those programs generally change. They can make good steps forward and kind of keep that progress. 30% will come back again. So they haven't recognized or done enough work to really make that change. And about 30% will just consistently come back through the system. And I think it's that last 30% that are the hardest and probably the best at getting you to collude. So collusion is when someone that is using force or violence or controlling behavior gets you to take their side. And because those people can be very charming and manipulative, that's why they're doing that in their relationship. We can all get pulled into that as well. And so just a way to avoid the trap is make sure you keep that victim survivor's voice, and listening to both sides then can be a big part of that. I would say if you're not sure who is the victim and who's the perpetrator in a relationship, it's a really good idea to call, ask for help, get someone that is more familiar with the area of family violence, because it is really tricky sometimes. And sometimes people using force are so good at blaming others that they can also get us to believe it's the other person's fault. It happens to practitioners, it happens with policemen. It's really easy for all of us. Another good thing to do is keeping the focus on behaviors. So when we look at what are the behaviors that are causing harm, what are the impacts of those behaviors, and not on intent. So we all generally judge ourselves by our intentions. And if people can get us, a lot of people that do use force and are controlling do have good intentions, but they're using behaviors that are actually really harmful. And so getting the focus back to, okay, I know you really want what's good for your kids, but the way you're doing this is harming them. So keeping the behaviors and the impacts in focus. And like I said, just remember that perpetrators are charming. Usually they wouldn't be able to do it if they couldn't convince people that they were right. And then victim survivors also have been taught to doubt themselves, all that gaslighting. They have that, am I crazy question in their head most of the time. And so a lot of times if you are interacting with a couple, the person using force will seem a lot calmer and in control of themselves. And the person that is a victim might feel a lot less sure and a lot more confusing the way they tell their story because of what they've been through. So it kind of is the opposite of what generally gets our trust. People that speak with confidence and clarity, we tend to trust easily. And this is just a situation where generally it's the opposite of our instincts. All right. So these are some references of places I got some of those stats from, and also places you can get more information. And I know, Sandra, you have another good course that we can share with people to learn more about domestic and family violence, and especially within the church setting. And then, like I said, there's some of the same helplines and some other ones to just get help. If you have questions, if you're working with someone, you're talking to someone and you want to give them a number to call. And there's stuff for victims, there's stuff for women, stuff for men. The kids helpline is really good. And this is also really helpful because for that spot of don't promise more than you can commit to. If you can't follow up, I'm not going to tell people to call me anytime, day or night, but these are numbers that you can for most of them. If you check online, they tell you what hours they're available. So not all of them are 24/7. But it is helpful to have those.
All right, awesome. That was pretty cool. We'll now be having our Q&A sessions. And for the panel, I'd like to invite Sandra and Pastor Sam to the seats here. Okay, would you like to introduce yourselves briefly?
Sure. So my name's Sandra. I'm the Ministry Associate for Women. And yeah, Stacey mentioned that I did a course through Ridley. It's an online course. It's free. Anyone can do it. Just Google Ridley and domestic family violence. It's an amazing 6-part course. It takes maybe an hour for each section. And it was really helpful for me in my understanding of domestic family violence and how we as a church can support people experiencing that. So do it, everyone should do it.
Sam, I'm one of the pastors here. Yeah, and what else did you want to know?
That's all.
Good.
Right. Right. We'll start with our first question. Reinforcing traditional gender roles was mentioned under coercive behavior. As Christians, isn't it not an issue with the gender roles themselves, but rather an incorrect view of gender roles that is enforced in controlling relationships? For example, women should do all housework.
Yeah, I think if you guys have answers, just grab the mic. Gender roles are very, very cultural. So it's for every culture, and for us as Christians, it's more about how do those get enforced, and is like Sam mentioned, is one person forced to earn the trust? Is one person more mistrusted? Is one person's voice valued more? So it's not about how you split up the work, but how is the respect level? How is the voice or control you have in the relationship? Is it equal?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And of course, in our own culture, it's changed over the years. My parents' relationship is very different to the relationship that we have. But there's a mutuality about both relationships that, yeah, that's the way they worked, and they loved each other and agreed, and they both worked really hard. And I think we operate the same way, but it's different, split up.
All right, thank you. Being abused in any form is unacceptable, but leaving is even harder. I'd rather stay and suffer than leave with the fear I could be found and face further consequences of wrath. What should someone do in this situation? So again, being abused in any form is unacceptable, but leaving is even harder. I'd rather stay and suffer than leave with the fear I could be found and face further consequences of wrath. What should someone do in this situation?
Yes, it is. It's really hard to leave. Like I said, it takes on average 7 tries before people do leave. And we do know just statistically risk increases greatly after you try to leave, which is a lot of times why people go back, because it gets so much worse. And there are situations where people can just survive it. And I think that's where we need to be in that space to respect whatever choice that person's making, because they know best their situation. And it's standing in that opposite voice. So trying to minimize the harm coming from that controlling or emotionally abusive relationship by speaking truth and speaking love and speaking value.
Yeah, I was going to say similar, where it is up to the person who is experiencing the abuse to choose how they want to respond. So we might think, oh, just get out, like that's crazy, but they know the risk that they're in. And they know that if they leave, it could be even worse for them. So I think for us, we just need to be that support. We need to continue to keep that connection, keep that relationship, always be there for them in any situation, so that they know that they can come and talk to you, or they know that you are their support. But I think, yeah, they're the one that needs to guide the conversation and guide what they want to do next.
Yeah, I think the practical things here too, I think I've been involved in situations, not in cross culture, so don't think you know who it is, where somebody was in danger and we arranged for a secret location for them to stay. And it was in a place with a caring Christian couple, but the partner wouldn't have been able to guess where they were. In my experience too, there are, like for a woman to leave a situation, she's leaving a home, she's leaving, that is very, very hard. And why should she have to leave if the bloke's causing the problem? So there are things that can be done. If the guy is acting illegally, then we can help support the person to get the police involved. And I have been involved in a situation like that where the police came, they removed the guy, and she stayed at home with her kids, and the police said, you can't go there, that's it. And I walked with him through dealing with that situation. It was very, very hard, but there was a lot less disruption to the family because she could stay in her home, she could look after her kids. And it was just, he's the one who caused the problem. So he should have been inconvenienced, and he was. And I thought, good on you, the cops did their job.
Many Christian victims of domestic violence want a permanent way out, but struggle to be free from guilt in leaving their relationships, especially if their spouses are the abusers. How do you reconcile the need for protection for the victims and the commitment to keep the vow till death do us part, or to offer forgiveness? Is divorce permitted in such circumstances?
I'll set the ball rolling. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul explains that there's a biblical separation. And in some instances, this is the most loving thing that can happen for the partner, that the person says, sorry, I'm not going to stay with you until you change. So it can be a wake-up call for the person to say, no, this behaviour is not acceptable, and I'm separating myself from you. Now, that doesn't necessarily lead to divorce, but it does provide a wake-up call. In instances I can think of, the person thought, righto, this is really serious. This is not just talk. I've got to go and do something. They've gone and got anger management training, which is available freely in the community, and they've made steps that indicated they had repented. Now, that's quite unusual, I understand, statistically, because in this case, the partner was warned that you mustn't have him back. He's just going to do it again. What you know the statistics better than me. It's a very high chance they'll reoffend. But by God's grace, this worked out. But it took a long, long time. So it didn't lead to divorce, but the separation really gave the space and the red flag to the guy to say, I have to deal with this. If I want my marriage to survive, I've got to address this.
I've forgotten the original question now, but
I can repeat it.
Is divorce permitted? Yeah, I do think, I guess a lot of that I would leave to the person to figure out. So I guess just one thing I would add to what you've said is sort of the difference between the way I see it, the difference between a legal divorce and spiritually where you're going. If you need to get divorced for legal reasons to protect your finances, to have assets for your kids, I think that's a bit of a different consideration from what you're doing with your faith commitment to a relationship.
All right, next question. How can we help trauma victims truly believe they are valued and loved if they find it so hard to believe it themselves due to how they view themselves?
That is a massive question. I think I just put patience and understanding as one bullet point on there, but a lot of it sits in that. And I think one thing we need to do is also have that deep-rooted sense of how valued and loved we are. And because if we have that deeply rooted in Christ, that's where we can actually hold it strongly for someone else who's a bit wavering on how strong that is, but also just giving it time. And it's really hard to keep giving someone love if they're not receiving it, but just understanding again, like, it's not because I'm doing something wrong in the way I'm loving them necessarily. It's just, it's hard to receive it. So whatever little bit they can pick up, you just keep giving.
I was just going to say, just keep reinforcing it. So when you meet up with them, just keep speaking that truth of who they are in Christ and who they are to them, and hopefully a little bit of it will sink in.
Yeah, one thing that struck me from your presentation, Stacey, was, in the initial conversation, don't ask questions that seem to put blame on the person. Well, he hit you. What did you do? Because I think that just reinforces the whole, well, you're not a worthy person. And so I think we need to be really careful that we don't do that blame thing.
I just wanted to add one more little. So I said it's a massive question because that is sort of the whole therapy journey. So working as a therapist, there's a lot more that we can and do. And so I would like encouraging people through that journey to get therapy, to really dig deep into that healing. There's a lot we do in the therapy area, but we need, like, therapy is going to be 1 hour every week or two. So you really need these other things happening for the therapeutic work to take root well.
Okay. There's an increasing blame on religion, especially in evangelical churches, on their failure to address domestic violence suffered by women because of their teaching on submission to male headship. How do we as a church respond to this?
By teaching people what the Bible actually says. So maybe it's best to do this by way of illustration. Again, not somebody in cross culture. So a newly married couple came to us and said, no, actually the guy came to me and said, we've got troubles in our marriage. I said, what's going on? And he said, I've asked my wife to lose weight and to get fitter, and she's not doing it. I said, which bit of the Bible are you talking about? And oh, well, she's supposed to submit to me and she's not. I said, so where does it say that you need to make sure that your wife submits to you? And there was silence. And I said, that's right. That's not in the Bible. Your role as a husband is to love your wife sacrificially. That's what Ephesians 5 says. Yes, it does say, wives, submit to your husbands. But it doesn't say, husbands, make sure your wives submit to you. And it doesn't say, wives, make sure that your husband gives up his life for you. The instruction that's for you, you do it. So the most loving thing for your wife, you must do that. If she wants to double her weight, so be it. I didn't say that. But what's the most loving thing you can do for your wife? How can you love and care and lay down your agenda for her so that she becomes like Jesus? And we don't know whether Jesus was fat or thin, and it doesn't really matter. You want her to be godly, don't you? And anyway, so I think that is where we get it wrong. I've got this great cartoon of this husband and wife reading books. And the title of one book is How to Submit to Your Husband. And the title of the other book is How to Really Love Your Wife. And of course, the husband's reading the How to Submit to Your Husband book. And the wife's reading the How to Really Love Your Wife.
No, I don't think I have a lot to add. I think that's really, like, if you get into what the Bible says, and a lot of those things I put on the slide are just phrases pulled out of context. So taking it back to this is the whole story.
Yeah, sorry. I just get, I often, or if I hear of people who are really big on this, on Ephesians 5 and the woman submitting to the husband. So that's often what I'll hear. I was like, but what about the husband loving his wife like Christ loved the church? So I think if I ever hear of that in relationships, I always make sure that I bring up that other side, because that's really dangerous for me when I hear people who are complementarian who, are strong on that, which is fine. But it has to be the whole part. It has to be the husband loving his wife like Christ loved the church, and to emphasize that as well, because often, a woman will think, oh, I have to submit to my husband, means I do everything that he says, but that's not the whole story. And I think we have to be really, I'm particularly really like, no, it says that husbands have to love their wives. So to, really push that side of it too, because if that gets lost, then that's not what the Bible says at all.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just going to add a little bit. I just wanted to also highlight this, like, this is something we can do, taking the time to learn about what are the dynamics of family violence. And so I think it's good to acknowledge that the church put this on and that you guys are here is standing opposed to what some people see.
To say too, the picture of power and authority in the Bible is upside down to what the world is. So we think in the world that if you have a position of authority and responsibility, that's a powerful position, and in the worldly sense it is. But what did Jesus say? He said, the one who's least shall be the greatest. We're going to look at this in 3 weeks' time, actually, in our sermons. So Jesus just turned the whole thing on its head. So what does leadership and power in a marriage look like? It's about servanthood and sacrifice. It's not about, saying you do this and you do that. And it's about, and actually that's a way more powerful thing than yelling and shouting at somebody. It's showing people what it looks like to be like Jesus. And Jesus believed that was way more powerful than being the boss and throwing your weight around.
It takes a lot of courage for someone to report on suspected case of domestic violence. Is there an official process in our church to deal with this? Please explain it works. Please explain how it works, including the reporting process and protection for the parties involved.
That's a giveaway, isn't it? We're looking at each other. We actually don't have a specific policy on how we handle domestic and family violence. We do have a complaints process, which any church member can engage in. That's all part of the Safe Churches manual. It's in the appendix to that. If you don't have access to that, you can contact admin at Cross Culture and ask for it. So we do have that process, but having said that, we are looking at all our processes, and we've been talking about having a protocol surrounding this about how we handle it, because we're realising that it's more important. So just recently, if you're at a recent members meeting, we set up a group which is called Ministry Workforce Committee. So they are looking at all our processes. Now, this is one that sort of falls between governance and pastoral kind of area. So, for example, we have statements about how we deal with marriage and stuff like that, and it's more like a what do we call it? I can't remember now. A policy kind of statement. And this is one that we want to develop. So recently, Sandra's done that training, and so has Pastor Lou's done other training. And we're looking at templates for having a process. So at the moment, it would fall under the complaints process, but we realise it doesn't fit neatly there, because usually it's between husband and wife or partners that this kind of thing happens. Yeah. So hope that helps. Not a very satisfactory response. Obviously, we always try and handle things in the light of Scripture, and also maintain confidentiality, especially where it could put others in danger. So pastorally, our first response would be if somebody came and said, "My husband's beating me up," would say, you need to report that to the police. That's illegal. That's criminal behaviour. And you need to report that to police. We will support you to do that. And then, but if they're not willing to do that, which is sometimes the case, even where people have suffered sexual abuse as an adult, or even as a child, and they're now an adult, sometimes they don't want to report it. And we're not obliged to report it unless they're underage. So it's a very difficult position for us to try and maintain their confidentiality, but also to make sure that the perpetrator doesn't go and do it again.
Okay, Thanks for sharing. I'm just wondering specifically for people with disability and people in the neurodiverse community, other than physical abuse being an obvious red flag, what line, if any, that's considered crossed for being abusive? Considering that people in this group often don't have a chance to voice themselves, and the primary caregivers can often be controlling and obsessive with the person that they're caring for, often without realizing themselves.
There were a lot of layers to that question. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm understanding it entirely right, because I feel like it could is the either way. So sometimes it's if someone is neurodiverse or has other challenges, they can be quite aggressive. So I think that was part of it. If they're not able to voice themselves, so it can go either way. They may not be able to voice that they are being hurt or abused, or some people have so much trouble expressing what they're feeling or thinking. Really, if they don't have words, all they have is physical actions. And so you can see where they might become quite aggressive, but it's actually an attempt to communicate because of their challenges with communication. But if this is looking at people with neurodiversity as victims where they don't have words, there is a lot to look for around like physical abuse would be part of it. I think isolation is a big part of it if they're not able to get out by themselves. So that's an area I think we can offer practical support for if caregivers are really feeling that overwhelmed, then we can help support by bringing people around, get them into communities. There's music groups, there's lots of groups and activities available for people that have disabilities. So just being alongside to support for caregivers that they get so overwhelmed, they do start to get aggressive or controlling or isolating. And also just support groups for those caregivers are really important. So they have other people who understand the challenges of caring for people with significant disabilities. So they have that emotional support and aren't then taking it out on the person they're supposed to be caring for. If I understood that question right.
Yep, thank you for that one. But also, I think the question is asking what if the carer is the abuser? What should we do to help the people who are, people with disabilities?
Yeah. So I think if the carer is the abuser, getting them into a support group to help with that it might be an anger management group. It might just be emotional support because the abuse is coming from a place of being totally spent and overwhelmed. And they really need people that understand that weight of caring for someone with a disability. So there's support for that person, but also, I guess that's what I was saying about being there to help the person that does have disability and sort of being an additional caregiver, getting them additional care. So it's not all on the person that's using abuse. But I think there's probably other community resources I'm not specifically aware of. So I would also call like the Orange Door or Safe Steps and just say, okay, in this specific situation, what are resources? And in Melbourne, a lot of it is very sort of city council specific, the way funding works. So it's hard to say this is the person to call. So if you start with Safe Steps or the Orange Door, they'll probably get you to the right resource for that person in that place.
It's just a question. Sorry, I'm taking over here, but so as I understand it, say you ring 1-800-RESPECT any other day and night. So I can do that if I'm wondering about a situation that I'm dealing with, or they just deal directly with victim survivors?
Yeah, if you're working to support someone, you can call as well and ask and get more insight for yourself.
There are many Bible verses on loving and forgiving one another. Are there any specific verses on how we should deal with perpetuators of abusive relationships?
I actually had advanced notice of this question. So here's a couple of examples. So Colossians 3:19, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. That's pretty clear, isn't it? In 2 Timothy 3, but understand this, in the last days, there will come times of difficulty. People will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness. Okay, so these are people within the church, obviously, but denying its power. And it ends with these three words: avoid such people. So it tells you how to deal with people who are like that, just steer clear of them. And but it's obviously incumbent on church leadership to call that out and say, no, you can't behave like that here. And we have had instances where we've dealt with that scenario where someone was physically abusive, and we call it out. Yep. And they can't come anymore. So there's a couple of instances. It doesn't, apart from that one, it's just saying avoid those people. It doesn't say that, if a bloke bashes up his wife, you should bash him up or whatever. There's not a, as far as I can see, a punishment system in place. Yeah, but the tenor of scripture is that, people are sinning. It should be called out, and we should repent if we're the person doing it.
Well, I guess a short, I also saw that question in advance. But I, for the same reason, I think we can pull single verses out and use them to hurt people. So my mind goes much more to the principles of repentance, like you've noted. So I think across the Bible, there's a principle of, if there is sinful behavior, we expect repentance from people and we want to help them change. And then also the principle of grace. And as we reflect on how much grace we've received, understand, like Paul was helping stone people. That is very physically abusive behavior. But God still called him, reached him in grace, and Paul changed his behavior. And so I think we have these examples where sort of whatever people have come from, whatever they've done, there is the opportunity to turn around, and we have grace when that repentance happens.
Next one. How about if a man is abused, especially emotionally by the partner, the situation is then more complicated? What should happen in this instance?
It is complicated, I think, because of those sort of gender roles, which we've discussed a little bit. So those ideas like men can't cry. So I think it's really hard for men, especially when there's emotional abuse happening, to say it, because just bringing up emotions is really challenging in some contexts. But apart from that, I think the same principles still apply. If it's a man that's in an emotionally abusive relationship, he gets to choose how he needs to respond to that. Does he need to get out? How can we support him, giving the opposite messages about his worth and value? Can we come alongside his partner to help that person be more kind? Is there something we need to call out? So that it's really the same principles, it's just different genders.
I never have anything to add because Stacey just says, so it's fine. Do you have anything to say?
No. The ratio is a lot lower, isn't it? I was reading the stats that 1 in 6 women have been suffered family violence. That's right, roughly, isn't it, in Australia? But 1 in 16 men. So that's still quite high. That's 6%. Yeah.
Are there any warning signs of a potential abuser during dating?
I think I've been listening to this podcast called Something Was Wrong. You should all listen to it if you want to. It's very interesting. But I think as somebody in these stories, you often hear that the person who's in the relationship who is experiencing the abuse or the manipulation, they don't recognize it very easily or straight away. It's only because it just happens so incessantly. It's very sneaky how it comes into a relationship. There's often a lot of, I don't know if you guys have heard of this term, love bombing. So it's just like, the abuser is pouring on the love and then slowly manipulating the person. And so then the person who's being manipulated is thinking, oh, but it's because they love me that so it's okay, these behaviors. And it's actually family and friends who are able to point these things out because they've known this person before and they see a change in this person's behavior. So I think in dating, I think if you're in a relationship trying to date, but in a community setting, if that makes sense. So don't be secretive, try to include the person in with your family and your friends so that your family and friends get to know this person as well. And if your family and friends notice anything and they give them that space to speak into that relationship, I think that's really important too. So yeah, I've been really encouraged by listening to this podcast that the person who's experiencing the abuse often doesn't recognize it until someone points it out. So if you're dating, I think giving your family and friends space to say something and ask them, any feedback, do you like this person? What do you think? And keep asking them because maybe their first impression often, like Stacey said, the person can be very charming. So to keep asking and finding out, what your family and friends think, keep giving them that space to speak into it. But if you, and as a friend, I think it's really important to, because you love your friend, to speak up and to share if you feel like there are any red flags. And kind of point out like, this is what, before you started seeing this person, I used to be like this, but I've kind of noticed that maybe things have changed a little bit and, do you want to tell me about this? Or how do you feel about when he does this or she does that? So that would probably be my thoughts on how you can identify either as somebody in a dating relationship or as a friend or family member of someone that is dating.
I wrote down, I had prior notice of this one too, thankfully. I wrote down 3 things. If the other person's being domineering, or if they're trying to coerce you to do something you're not comfortable with, or if they're speaking to you disrespectfully. I think those 3 things would be warning signs.
I would agree with everything you guys have said. I guess one good thing to look for. So the one little thing in addition to all that is just how do you disagree? So it's just, even today we were arguing about whether or not chili should be in chocolate and respectfully told each other, you're wrong. So he's wrong. There should be chili in chocolate, but he doesn't have to eat that. Then I get all the chili chocolate. But really like looking at how do you disagree? Do they respect you and you tell them that you disagree, or do you get demeaned for that? I think that's really an easy one to see and easier if you have other people around to see.
Okay, we have 2 more questions before we end Q&A. This is the second to last one. A lot has been talked about a husband and wife relationship, and there seems to be an option to leave if necessary. What about abuse between a parent and an adult child, or abuse of a sibling towards another? It seems like there are no options to leave with blood ties.
I think that one is very challenging because it's also quite cultural. I would say as a white person, there's more cultural opportunity to separate, like within, I guess, even in American culture, it's highly individualistic. And so it's not as uncommon as it is in some other cultures. But it is really, really challenging if you end up cutting off like one parent and not the other because you can't have that communication anymore. So yeah, it's a really difficult situation. I want to hear from others.
Yeah, similarly, I'm a white person and I know this is, in our culture, you can say to your parents, thanks for your advice, but I'm not going to follow it. And there won't be too many consequences. The parents know they can't do much about it, apart from cut you out of their will or whatever. But I know for most other cultures, that's not the case. And parents do everything from choose your marriage partner to your career and everything. I've talked to people who've really grappled with this. How do I honour my mother and father? Say, for example, in an Indian context where the person's a Christian and they want to marry another Christian and the parents are insisting that they marry someone from the caste, Christian or not. And because that's the way it works in the wider culture. It is extremely difficult for that person to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I don't think there are easy answers to this. I've heard some very good cultural workarounds. So actually, we in the Gospel Coalition, we've talked about this stuff. Like, so people from an Asian background wanting to do ministry, and the mum and dad said, no, we put you through uni. We didn't waste the money so you can go and live for next to nothing for the rest of your life. So actually, in this particular church where they do have an Asian associate minister, so his mum goes and talks to their mum, notices the mums who are involved, and and says to the mum, look, if your son or daughter goes into ministry, that's going to be a great blessing for you. God's going to bless your household, and God's going to, and it's quite effective apparently. So, so I think there are sort of some things that can be done without disrespecting the cultural norms, I think, yeah.
I'm just thinking about, JP, the question was if the parent is abusive or...
It didn't specify. It's about abuse between a parent and an adult child, or abuse of a sibling towards each other.
Yeah, sure. So I also think, so thinking about that question, if being adults, then I guess you have a little bit more autonomy and you have a little bit more independence. So if you, because it's a family, you can't necessarily cut yourself off from them. But I think there will be situations where you will get together as a family. Maybe there'll be Christmas, maybe there'll be other situations where you feel obliged to go along and you know you're going to see that person. Obviously, I think as much as possible, you know, if you feel that that person isn't safe, then trying obviously not to be around them in that situation, but also going into it almost knowing that, or it sounds terrible to expect that something will happen, but kind of going into it thinking, oh, everything will be great. This is another opportunity for, you know, things to be, you know, it's going to be a great Christmas, might be unrealistic, and you might end up then, you know, feeling really hurt and disappointed. So I think just being aware and being realistic about, yep, I know that this person isn't necessarily safe, or I know that they have hurt me in the past. And so, you know, I'll be respectful, I'll say hi and all that sort of thing, but to put yourself into a situation where you, to get yourself hurt again, I think isn't wise either. So just, being careful in that sort of space.
I guess, and all of this does need to be put in whatever the cultural context is, but just sort of some basic principles around boundaries. So being like, there might be a certain behavior that is like, that's where I'm going to draw the line, and you can communicate that before. If you still want to go to family events, you're not hanging out with that sibling one-on-one, but it is safer at family events, so you don't want to cut that off. So just kind of having clear boundaries that if this person does this, that's when I will leave. I won't, like, we're going to have to meet in a place that is like, I'm not going to their house. They don't get to host Christmas, or I can't come because that's not safe. But, you know, having some boundaries about where is safe to meet. I will come for this amount of time, or if this line gets crossed, I'm going to have to take my family and leave, or I'm going to have to leave. And just like being clear about that can be really helpful. That is not easy to do. So I guess around that, it's also really good just to have sort of your support people ready for before and after. So if you know, like, keeping this family connection is really important. I know it's going to be really hard, so I'm going to have this person to talk to before, and I'm going to have this person ready for after. So I'm going to hear all those messages again that have hurt me. So I'm going to have someone ready to speak truth back that I need to hear, or to listen to me and remind me how loved I am. Those can be really helpful.
And for our last question, I have all the signs that I am being emotionally abused in my relationship, but I am in denial. How can the man/woman who claims to love me do this to me? How can I overcome this? Signs sort of has the
So I think if you're feeling that, if you're having those questions, part of what Sandra said earlier, having some people around you to help you assess is really helpful. One of the signs might be that you don't have people around you, and that's what's causing the concern. And so I think that's one thing to do would be try to get others around you in that relationship. But also I think it is important, and whether that's you or if it's someone you're trying to walk alongside, there's love in these relationships. That's why people enter them. And so you do love and care about this person you're in a relationship with. And I think they also do love. So if someone's using force or controlling behavior, again, if we look at the intentions might often are quite good. They want to love, but they don't know how. They haven't seen healthy relationships. And so I think there is room to ask, like, see, can we get counseling? Do you want to go talk to someone? Can we spend time with these other people who have a relationship I really admire? And then seeing how they respond to that is also a really good sort of test. Like, are they willing to make some changes if you're currently being hurt, or is it time to end it?
Yeah, I think that bit at the end is key, isn't it? Because sometimes people don't want to do much about it. Yeah, so people say, oh, we've got problems in our marriage, and we say, well, go and get help. And you give them a list of names to go and get help, and nothing happens. And so part of me saying, how far do you push them, encourage them, or how far do you say, okay, if you haven't got the oomph to take that first step, then it's probably not going to work. Would that be right? You are more skilled in these things than me.
Yeah, I think it is that, because when we're in those places, if we do love someone, we can feel that they love us, then really, like, you want to give them the chance. And I think it's fair to give someone a chance. But if they really are, so if they're just denying any harm to you and you know you're feeling harm, then that's not a good starting point, right? But if they're willing to explore it and start to make some changes, then we all need to change. We all have behaviors that aren't helpful or are hurtful to other people.
Awesome. That's all the time we have for the Q&A. So once again, I'd like to thank Pastor Sam and Sandra for joining us in the panel. Yep. And if you have any more questions you'd still like to ask Stacy, she's going to be around here for a while, just after the session ends. So do stick around to talk to her. And yeah, so once again, we'd like to thank Stacy for coming over to talk to us for the seminar. And as a token for our appreciation, we'd like to give you this thank you card. There you go. All right, thank you. We can sit down now. No worries. Thank you so much. All right. We also would like to thank someone else for her service. So briefly, I'd like to invite Auntie Huidi to the stage. Auntie. Yeah, so we want to say a very huge thank you to you for all the love and energy you've done in leading the Caring Together ministry. So we'd like to show our appreciation with these flowers that Serena is going to pass you. Okay. Thank you, Auntie. Thank you, Auntie. Yeah, and we'd also like to thank everyone else who has attended this seminar. We hope you've learned something new. And just for closing, if you'd like to attend more of our seminars in the future, Our next one will be on the theme of singleness. Dates on the 29th of August. So put it in your calendars, or you can wait for our announcements during the service itself. And for mental health resources, if you or anyone else you know need professional mental health support, Cross Culture has resources that could help you. If you go to crossculture.com, resources, then other resources, you'll find a link to the mental health form inquiring about your needs. Fill these up and the ministry will see to it as soon as possible. Then we can refer to you to proper channels so you could get the support you need from professionals. We also have a list of Christian counselors and mental health practitioners. So if you'd like to be connected to one, please let the Caring Together ministry know. And before you go, we just have one last thing for you to do. So this QR code leads to a feedback form that you could fill up so we could improve on our future sessions. If you also want a copy of the slides for the seminar, you can indicate it somewhere on the form itself, and we shall email it to you. And that's all we have for you today, everyone. Thank you for coming. Stacey England, thank you. And panelists as well, thank you. All right. Have a blessed Sunday, everyone.